Thank you everyone for joining us. Today we will discuss the top tips and quick strategies you can use to improve learners' executive functioning skills. I am Jess Corinne. I am the head of educational services. I am so pleased to be here. I started my career as a classroom teacher, joined forces with Linda Mood Bell, and then opened my own private practice, where I really pride myself on empowering neurodiverse learners through multisensory evidence-based approaches. We have Jeff Betancourt and Rachel Leonard here as our panelists. Jeff, I'll give you the floor to introduce yourself for a couple minutes, and then Rachel, go ahead. Looks like you're muted. Not a worry. There you are. Thanks for joining us.
Technology is one of my fortes. I've been in my career for nearly 30 years, began as a licensed marriage family therapist, and then about 20 years ago became a licensed educational psychologist. I've worked in schools, public and private, as well as private evaluations across the age span from kindergarten to career planned adults, and have enjoyed that. And executive functioning is one of my passions in regards to helping individuals find a better way of being productive. Thank you.
Wonderful. Absolutely. Rachel, you're up.
Hi, my name is Rachel Leonard. I've been an education specialist for over 20 years and have worked in a variety of settings. And I'm just really excited to be part of this webinar. And one of my favorite things is just working with learners to use their strengths and their interests to reach their potential.
Fabulous. Thank you both for being here. Today's agenda is as follows. We'll give a brief broad stroke overview into Learnfully's mission and offerings. Then we'll dive into executive functioning as a whole and open the floor for questions and answers. We will hopefully have time for questions from the audience later on. So feel free to drop those questions into the chat. And if for some reason we're unable to answer those questions today, we will circle back and ensure that you get the answers that you need and deserve. So Learnfully is a personalized platform of a highly curated network educational specialists who are trained, certified, and understand the workings of neurodiverse learners through multisensory evidence-based approaches. We pride ourselves on differentiation and truly understanding the learner as they are and what those goals entail. So making sure that we're meeting the learner at their current levels, incorporating strengths and interests, and then guiding them on their path to potential to ensure that they see success and feel confidence all along the way. We are ever growing our platform of content as well as specialists and consultants. That's why both Jeff and Rachel are here. They're part of our platform. And we're really strong in proactive communication, to be honest. We want to ensure that we're tracking our learners' progress over time and that we're communicating that progress every step of the way to both parents and educators alike. We want to be this collaborative village, this community, a team of really supporting the learner by building their skills from the ground up, really strengthening a foundation for learning, and then bridging the gap between their potential and performance so that we can ensure that they are able to lean into their true selves as learners and beyond. Learnfully is multisensory. As a whole, we take into consideration our learners' styles and profiles. All the while, we're implementing instruction on a 3-channel platform, if you will. So we're looking at every aspect of the brain and how it processes information as a whole, and making sure that our implementation takes into account the importance of auditory, visual, and kinesthetic delivery of information and processing skills. So we're looking at our programming as an opportunity to really strengthen these underlying sensory cognitive functions. And we're implementing instruction that is research driven in every sense of the word through multisensory channels. We take into consideration Alan Pavio's dual coding theory. We're looking at a learner's ability to take information in, whether it be oral or written, and translate that information into a mental representation. And this is a strategy that learners can use across the board. So those who are struggling with reading, writing, math, critical thinking, but especially executive functioning, because it really represents the idea of your brain translating oral and written language into a visual representation. So you can tap into that mental movie, that imagery language connection to then think critically, recall and retrieve information, and express yourself accordingly. So this is one of the many techniques that we can use in executive functioning, but it serves as a framework for our learners to stand upon and a resource to tap into. I'll give a brief overview into executive functioning, and then I'm going to turn the mic over to our panelists. So executive functioning is a very general yet very complex term. It is now that we have a label for some of these prefrontal cortex challenges, it's getting a lot of momentum in the education field as a whole. Executive functioning really is the conductor or the CEO of your brain. It is housed in the prefrontal cortex, and it is responsible for how you effectively manage your daily happenings as a really general definition, but it's so much more complex than that. It allows a learner to really regulate their mind and body, to think flexibly, to attend for a sustained period of time, to manage their time, to plan and prioritize, to organize their life, their thinking, their productivity, and really follow through overall. And so executive functioning, as you can imagine, it's like this conductor who's constantly managing all of the neural pathways in your brain. And with time and with direct explicit coaching, you can train the brain to streamline some of those pathways once you clear the stress fog that might be occurring in the front of your brain and preventing your other areas to really tap into their potential. So some learners who struggle with executive functioning are inattentive, they're disorganized, they mismanage their time, they are unable to launch or initiate in tasks, and they may even do all of their homework but forget to turn it in, right? Sound familiar? I'm sure. So as you can imagine, it's very complex to describe executive functioning. It's just as complex to treat, although there are trainable, explicit coaching strategies that you can use instructionally and beyond to ensure that your learner feels supported and can maximize their potential and really help support some of these challenges that they're experiencing on a day-by-day, hourly basis. Okay, so let's do this. Let's dive in. The first question is for Jeff. I'm really curious from your lens how the pandemic has impacted executive functioning skills.
The issues with the pandemic is executive functioning individuals that struggle in that area. They're looking for a variety of novel activities to help keep their brains engaged. And that's an overlay on that executive functioning deficit. So with the pandemic, we've all experienced this, the cabin fever effect. And what tends to happen is, if you haven't seen it, bless you, but traditionally executive functioning would increase with a change in routine, definitely the routine that pandemic has taken us into. It would be reasonable to anticipate our youngsters to show more distress in these areas that executive functioning really learning really requires of the executive functioning skill set.
Most certainly, and as I'm sure you can validate, it's really that overarching stress fog that I mentioned, that anxiety that's preventing these areas in the front of the brain to really access the component skills that are responsible for these other academic and really life skills as a whole. So I imagine that the uptick, the significant uptick in anxiety has really punctuated the point and the need for executive functioning training in these learners. So that's helpful. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. So Jeff, what are the early indicators? What can parents and educators be on the lookout for early on in the trajectory of a learner's academic career?
I get asked that question quite a bit. In fact, yesterday during a parent-teacher conference, two of the teachers expressed their concern for their own children prior to the meeting. They were 6 years, 7 years, 8 years old. And the parents are noting that the students have a hard time staying on task, which would be that distractibility, but it's not so much a flavor of hyperactivity. It's just this awareness that the students are having a real hard, their children are having a hard time managing their state. They're looking for all the parts to finish a task, or they're moving from one task to another. They'll repeat the request a number of times. It's not uncommon for executive functioning individuals with a challenge to have auditory processing disorder. So what ends up happening is the parental involvement, where we ask them to, feed the dog, or to, put the dishes on the table for dinner. Any of those traditionally reasonable requests, they tend to just slide right off of their ears. Then it escalates, the parent frustration, and it's hard for parents to sometimes really to differentiate between that foggy feeling versus maybe deliberate avoidance of tasks. And then it sort of escalates this very negative feedback loop between the parent and the children. And as you can see, as they grow year by year, and those requests become more significant or more complex, oftentimes those challenges can lead to more parental frustration and inherent self-talk that our children struggle with when they have EF deficits.
Great point. Yeah. And I see it in my own children, to be honest. And Jeff has kind of coached me through this with the idea of my children I have 4 children, but some of them are young, and they leave like a track behind them, right? You mentioned this, like the snake skin behind them kind of effect. And I see it all the time, quite honestly. And there's a couple of my children who do it more so than the others. So it's really intriguing that from a very early age, like we're talking 2 years of age, they necessarily put those Legos back in the bin, or, and needed a lot of repetition, like you said. So that's
Thank
helpful.
you for bringing that up. Yeah, yes, it's that snakeskin approach where our youngest son has severe executive function issues, and when he would come in from playing outside or from school, he would drop things just sort of along the way, and we would inevitably sort of have to trail behind him and pick it up. Whereas our middle son, who's very linear and very neurotypical, just by nature, he would gather his items so he could find them later, which is truly a neurotypical type of function. So the picture that comes to mind is the Peanuts, where you've got Pigpen, and he walks down the road, and that dust cloud follows him.
Yes.
And I'm sure that Pigpen sort of wonders, is the dust looking for me, or am I just finding the dust? And unfortunately, that's a reality, is that they don't have to look for the dust because they create their own dust.
Totally. Absolutely.
And it's painful to see children who really work hard and have good intentions that just are struggling. And it's difficult to see parents when they're in that loop where, how do I intervene? Where do I start?
Right. And we'll get into those strategies, but that's a great point, is it's very frustrating from an early age. And so helping to explicitly train some of those behaviors through repetition and consistency is key. So let's dive into some of those. And this is for you, Jeff. One more question, at least for now, is how does a parent find the resources, right? They notice these symptoms early on. How are they able to find the right team, the right resources to address these challenges?
Well, I would say, and this isn't a heckler in the crowd, but I would say that Learnfully really exposes the handles that parents need to grab onto, all the nuance of that executive functioning challenges. There's some really wonderful websites. The first one I'd recommend would be Attitude, ADITUDE.com, which is just a resource for the non-neurotypical learner. And CHAD, which is a nationwide support program for individuals with ADD. And ADD is somewhat synonymous with executive functioning. And actually, executive functioning challenges define ADD with more accuracy than just a broad stroke of an ADD diagnosis. It helps us understand the subcomponents of ADD, which then allows us to target interventions that really do support the maturation of those sub elements.
That's a great point. I would add understood.org too to that triage of websites, because I love Attitude, love Chat, I love Understood. So they're all very helpful resources for parents and educators alike. So as a practitioner, Rachel, how do you formulate a plan, right? So somehow the learner, it comes to you and the parent is stressed and frustrated, as is the learner. So what's your next step?
Great question. The first thing is definitely to, kind of gather an inventory, right? We want to see with the use of, like, for example, the CEFI, the comprehensive executive functioning inventory. We can utilize that. It has a parent inventory, it has a teacher inventory, it has a student inventory. We take all of that information and then we develop recommendations that are, really focusing on that one goal at a time. We'll pinpoint those areas of need, tackle them, break them down, and then definitely bring that learner into the process. That's so important in the things that we do. We start with that one goal and then we build from there. We want to make sure that that learner is successful in building that confidence with each skill.
I couldn't agree more. I think if you layer too many goals at one time, it's overwhelming, and it's clearly the antithesis of what an executive functioning challenged learner needs, right? They need the opposite. They need streamlined, organized, one chunk at a time type approach. So that's absolutely in agreement with our practices.
Yeah.
Here's an example. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, it just, sounds so simple, right? It's
Yep.
just give them a checklist or whatever, but really it's very complex. We want to shape the behavior with training. I heard you use that earlier, and that's exactly it. And then provide that mentoring piece and modeling until they're, successfully using it across a variety of settings.
Right, exactly. The generalization effect, and ensuring that for each of those goals, you're hitting the levels required. So introduction, engage in the learn of the process, helping them learn how they learn best through metacognition in every single goal. Because you're right, it does sound simple. Let's just give them a checklist. Let's just make sure that we hold them accountable to a checklist. But it's so much more complex than that, because they forget to even use the checklist. And then if you're nagging or you're harping on them as a parent, it adds to the family dynamic in a negative way. And so there's a lot of repetition, consistency, coaching, mentoring that goes on to really instill a positive perception of oneself, but also through these strategies and resources they can use. So it's beyond the checklist, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
totally
Even though checklists are great tools, but
yes, certainly agree. Absolutely. So Rach, can you walk us through a few simple strategies that parents might be able to use at home? Just as quick tips, quick grabs, knowing full well these are very complex, but that it might be helpful for them to at least see a list like this.
Oh, for sure. For sure. One of the things that we talk about are utilizing those step-by-step approaches to work, right? We chunk it out, we break it down. Writing assignments in a planner, we utilize some of those things. Time organizers, computers, watches with alarms, a lot of visual aids and schedules just posted wherever that learner is working, so that it's present in their face and they can see it and be reminded to use it. And then we're going to review that many times, beginning of the day, beginning of the week, throughout the week, and at the end of the week to follow up as well. And it's really, it's important to, focus on those transitions. How are we going to move from one activity to the next, things like that. So just
to streamline it, right? And to avoid the stress that the unknown, or that when a learner struggles executive functioning, their cadence and their estimation of time is not always accurate. So they're constantly in a state of stress and anxiety, which then fogs their ability to think clearly beyond. So I think it's really helpful to have those tried and true structured systems right in front of them, so they can resource them, but also they can feel reprieve. They can take a deep breath and know that there's a system in place that works for them, they've seen success with, and they can count on. So they're not constantly worried about what's next. Am I going to miss something? Am I going to lose something? And then that in and of itself will prevent them from being functioning in this area. So I like the idea of alerts and alarms too, because they can count on that. It's auditory and visual, so it's very multisensory. And these are all quick tips that you can use day to day, right? They can use in every exercise of their life across environments, just like you said. Jeff, did you have a comment for that? Sorry, I thought I saw you raise your hand. No, okay, good. Just making sure. So that just leads us to the next step. So you have these quick tips, quick strategies. We know it's more complex than just chunk it out. There is research to say that if you write information in your planner, it starts imprinting that, not just that habit, but also imprinting the information in your brain that'll then streamline some of those neural pathways. So beyond these quick tips, how do you ensure generalization takes place?
Well, it definitely is the use of a couple of different things. We start
Okay.
with the external support. We want to structure our environment with those cues, the prompts, the visuals, such as that visual schedule, et cetera, like you said, to see it right in front of us. And then we want to provide those suggestions on how to accomplish tasks or activities, like in encouraging, the learner to be part of that process and developing their own solutions. Along with those external supports, we want to have that motivation. It could be natural motivations, reward and encouragement, because we want to encourage that behavior to continue.
Mhm.
And then, as you work on that and you build on those skills, such as building the vocabulary and language, incorporating those verbal cues and questions, modeling the behaviors of problem solving and self-reflection, we incorporate those three things, and then it becomes internalized, right?
Mhm.
As we provide feedback on the child's performance and encouraging that self-monitoring, which is a key component of that executive functioning, we're teaching those awareness strategies. And that helps supports that internalization and generalization across the settings and the different environments and activities.
I totally agree. I think it is important for the learner to own the process and be bought in, like you said, and see success so it becomes more intrinsically motivating. How do you also ensure that it crosses all environments? So they might feel success and see support, at home, but then how do you then ensure that it carries over and is generalized into all settings?
I think that is where that communication piece comes in.
Hmm.
We want to talk about with that learner, how can we apply it in this setting? How can we apply it in that setting? But also involving the parents and the teachers in the process is really
Yeah,
important. We want to normalize the use of the tools, I think,
right,
and the developed plans, and
right.
help that learner understand that it's okay to use this in each environment as well.
Hmm.
Um,
That's huge. Proactive communication in this tripod effort, right? So the teacher, the educator, the parent, and the learner, without putting extra layers of stress on the parent. This is to alleviate the stress from the family dynamic and the learner as a whole. And so I think that's really important to stress that we are all in this together. We're communicating in proactive ways, but also helping the learner take charge, be accountable, be independent, instead of adding layers of complexity to the family dynamic as well. We're just communicating and helping coach them in an organic way on how to streamline these processes across all environments.
Exactly. And I really think a lot of that, getting that learner buy-in and teaching the why behind these strategies is really,
Yes,
really important as well.
brilliant
And
point.
finding what works for the learner. Sometimes
Mhm.
a checklist might not be the best thing, and we have to, adjust to what their needs are and their interests. So
Truly differentiate it. Love that. Thank you, Rach. Okay, so we kind of just talked about this. Sorry that I jumped ahead. It was just natural to do so. How important is it for parents and teachers to be involved in the coaching process?
yeah, I think, you said it so well. It's just important to have that consistency and repetition across all environments, but we don't want to put that added stress, within that family dynamic. So that's where, an education specialist or a EF coach can come alongside and really help relieve that stress. Just coaching the
Mhm.
learner on how to utilize this, and incorporating those strategies into their daily life.
Love it. Thank you for that. So Jeff, one last question for you, and Rachel, feel free to jump in here too. What's something that you wish parents knew before starting this journey? I mean, as a parent, you and I are both parents of learners who struggle in this way, Jeff. So I'm curious, what's something that you just wish they would know at the beginning or that you would have known? You're muted, sorry. It's okay.
Um, Taking a deep breath on a daily basis as a parent. Um, uh, it's wonderful to have an EF child, because they are creative, they are unique, they are definitely a slice of a Robin Williams and a variety of characters. But the parenting approach really has to have some flexibility
Mm,
than what we traditionally would use for a neurotypical child. And so it's truly a I always encourage parents when they're seeking their own support for their own sanity is finding that coach to help them uh, keep in mind what the ultimate goals are for your child and taking one day at a time and recognizing that it might take a few changes to the recipe for some of the simplest tasks to get accomplished and then continuing that recipe, even maybe tweaking it as the need arises. Uh, Flexibility is a key feature without introducing chaos a part of that flexibility.
Yes, absolutely. And understanding that it will all work out. It's all going to be okay. It's just
Yeah.
there's going to be bumps along the road, and if you anticipate and expect that, it kind of makes it easier to cope with it.
Right. And probably the only last piece would be is that the old phrase, the fruit never falls far from the tree. That's always the difficult part when I'm working with a family is inevitably uh, it- one of the parents will have the same struggle as the child. And it's hard for a parent to recognize that or to admit to
Hmm.
that. But if a parent can recognize that those attributes really came from their contribution to their child's neurochemistry, then it helps the other parent, who traditionally is a linear thinker, as well as their parenting strategy to stay on track with consistency. And so you're sort of actually learning yourself what is a more
Hmm.
productive way of operating. And then you're in some ways able to translate that with more insight to your child, who
Hmm.
is very much a reflection of some of the things you've contributed to them in the process of them coming to us.
It's so true. It's very true. And having that introspection is key because then you can tap into what did or didn't work for you, right? And I think as a learner, I mean now thankfully we're so much more transparent with our learners because we want them to be part of the process, to be seen and to be heard. But I feel like some parents of this generation and even a later generation didn't have as much transparency, and so they didn't have there was I don't want to say label, but they weren't necessarily coining some of these terms. So we didn't really know what we struggled with until we have a chance to look back. And I say we as the parent, because you just don't realize what you struggle with until you look back and you're like, oh, that's why. So I'm so thankful that that might not always be the case as we all evolve as a community. But at this point in time, it's true. It gives you some introspection and reflection on what did or didn't work for you so that you can streamline that for your learner and make it the most effective. It's a great point. Well, thank you both for answering those questions. I am so grateful for your time. I just want to ensure that our audience knows that we are a personalized platform that differentiates all our instruction, and we do have executive function at coaching as part of our plan. As Rachel mentioned, we do start with an inventory and a parent questionnaire. We start with a caregiver questionnaire, also a teacher questionnaire, to really pinpoint where that breakdown is happening. Because quite honestly, some executive functioning challenged learners might only struggle with a few of those component skills, a few of the branches of the tree. Even though it's executive functioning as an overarching skill, we really want to hone in and personalize it in an individualized fashion. So we do so by screening them initially and then ensuring that we're coaching them all along the way and making recommendations that are differentiated for each and every learner. Some of our learners will come into the platform with executive functioning challenge and pair that with some reading difficulties, written expression delays, math complications. And so we want to meet the learner where they are and provide the recommendations based on their needs. So sometimes they might need intensive remediation where they see us over the summer months, a little bit each day, sprinkling it in. So we're building some of those underlying sensory cognitive functions towards independence. All the while we're coaching their executive functioning skills and ensuring that they're reachable and teachable. So they might qualify for remediation. They might need enrichment where we're targeting specific skills like in executive functioning, study skills, test prep, time management, organization, attention, flexibility, all of that. And they may also benefit from a little bit of preview and front loading, which is where the rise and shine comes in. So we might review the prior year standards and preview what's to come in the first few months of their next school year to relieve a little bit of that unnecessary anxiety and allow their executive functioning coaching to take its true course. So I, again, am so grateful that you all had the opportunity to join us. We did record the presentation. We will share that with our audience. And I am so sorry that we didn't get to any questions. I see some in our chat. So we'll make sure absolutely wholeheartedly that we circle back with everyone to ensure that they receive the answers they need. But please, in the meantime, don't hesitate to reach out, email us, call us, text us, whatever is most convenient for you. Thank you all for joining us. That concludes our session of Top Tips of Executive Functioning.